Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller, and you have turned into your Alaska weather, brought to you by the National Weather Service. Tonight is January 31st, 2018. Happy birthday to my big sister, Shannon. Hope you have a great day. And as always, you can get in touch with us, 1-800-472-0391. That'll get you to the automated line, and you can speak directly to a forecaster at any of the 3 offices across Alaska. Also, weather.gov/Alaska, that's going to get you again to the entire state view, and you can see any watches, warnings, or advisories that are in effect, and also get in touch with any of the 3 offices for your local forecast. And then if you need to get in touch with us here at the TV desk, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov, and someone will be sure to respond to you as quickly as possible. So, for those that have a solar interest, or I should say a astronomical interest, here is our blood moon from last night, this total lunar eclipse out over southern Alaska. This photo is courtesy of NASA from the Griffith Observatory, but for those that were out that had the clear skies, hopefully you got to enjoy this pretty amazing sight. I went out and there was just a few clouds, but I could still see the transition from partial to total, which was pretty amazing. Now on into our forecast for the next couple days. So we're going to be talking about some gusty offshore continuing cold winds that we've been seeing, parts of the Matanuska Valley, parts of southwest Alaska, plenty of offshore flow. Also a battle that will unfold in the Gulf of Alaska between that cold air and warm air coming north from the North Pacific and the southern Gulf of Alaska. Winter storm watch is going to be in effect for southeast Alaska, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. And blowing snow from Barter Island also going to be part of our winter weather advisory headlines. So let's look at those hazards. And for our first one, we have down in southeast Alaska a winter storm watch in effect for mainly the southern portions, mainly down by Petersburg and Port Alexander, also near Cake, and even Hyder is included in there. For the area right there along the coastlines, it's south of Sitka, and this is a winter storm watch. We're expecting generally between 5 to 10 inches of snow from this possibility near Hyder of up to 12 to 18 inches of snow, so a little bit more there for the colder inland locations. And this is going to be in effect from 12 a.m. Friday until Friday evening. So again, winter storm watch in effect. Please stay tuned. We will keep you updated on that as we go forward and watch that system develop. Then up towards the northern portion of our state, up here right in the northeast corner, from the southeast to the northeast corner of Alaska, here we have a winter weather advisory that will be in effect from Thursday at 11 a.m. until midnight Thursday night. And this is for blowing snow, maybe a couple inches of falling snow, but primarily blowing snow, and visibility is reduced to about a half mile at times. So be advised if you are traveling in those areas to take the proper precautions and be prepared for those reduced visibilities. So now on into our satellite, and we can see here that we have our area of low pressure spinning in the Gulf. This has really been created from cold offshore flow moving out over the warm water, helping to wrap in some of that energy. And so with that, this boundary has basically just been stretched out from east to west, and we'll see it here again. Pretty much clear conditions over much of the mainland. High pressure helping things to rotate in from the Siberian air mass, coming all the way up and over down through the Arctic and then down into the mainland. That's where we have the majority of our moisture is really confined here right along the northern Gulf Coast. If you look carefully, you can see just a few clouds, some of the higher clouds up here, but just a few clouds backing up along the Brooks Range as well. Not really anything significant to speak of, but you can see that next system starting to line up there for our blowing snow. And then also have some clouds as you move offshore near southwest Alaska. You can see there some clouds pushing off into the Bering. Some snow showers expected there. There's a little bit better view for much of southeast Alaska. Pretty clear skies, just some patchy clouds towards the Sitka area. So how does that look as far as our surface map for this afternoon? Well, much of the precipitation is actually south of southeast Alaska. This low is spinning itself out and moving inland, so the rain that is associated with it is pushing into south of southeast Alaska, pushing inland near the Dixon Entrance region. And really what we have is this kind of stationary boundary here. This is the representation between the cold air moving off the mainland and then the warm air that is sitting out over the open water of the Gulf. And so with that, just some light snow along this boundary here, even some rain-snow mix as you get back towards Kodiak Island. They were reporting a changeover from snow this morning now to rain this afternoon. And then a little bit more showery on the backside of this low out over the Gulf of Alaska. Otherwise, what looks like clouds is actually just the snowpack out over south central Alaska and much of southwest Alaska, where skies have been mostly clear courtesy of that dry air and that high pressure that is up to our north, helping to push things offshore. Again, there's those tight packing of the isobars. That tight packing, once again, means that you have a strong pressure gradient, which usually leads to those stronger winds. This one happens to be blowing as per usual from high to low, and so therefore we get those gusty winds in the typical locations like Valdez, the Matanuska Valley, and Thompson Pass. Then those offshore winds will continue off into the Bering, and with that we see some showers being created once you get out into the far western Aleutians. Up towards the Beaufort Seacoast, that's where we have our area of low pressure. There's that trough of low pressure. Not really expecting a lot in the way from that tonight. There is some light snow reported up there near Prudhoe Bay, but near Barrow. But as that system slides to the east tonight, that's when we expect a little bit more activity associated with it from some light snow showers possibility. And then we have some fog expected along the Seward Peninsula, some freezing fog in there. Otherwise, not a lot of change across the Gulf. What we'll see is this boundary slides south. And then as that continues to kind of get hung up across the northern Gulf, here comes our next area of warmer air associated with this low that never really quite makes it into our area. So this is that battleground that we talked about in the headlines there. This cold air trying to push off the mainland with warm air and plenty of rain and moisture surging northward. So here is where we're going to expect the activity. And as we go into Thursday, that's where we can really see the map get lit up a little bit more, and that's where we start to see the precipitation potential start to push back into southeast Alaska. So rain mainly from Dixon Entrance southward, a rain-snow mix right there along the border, and then we switch things over to all snow once we get up into Juneau's area for southeast Alaska. So continuing those offshore winds and watching out for snow to start to fall once we get into the day on Thursday. And then out towards the Gulf of Alaska, you can see continued precipitation across the northern Gulf, stretching all the way back towards Kodiak Island, where we expect things to continue to be fairly wet for those folks there. It's about the wettest spot in the state right now with this pattern. Dry offshore flow continues, starts to weaken a little bit for southwest Alaska, so we should see things starting to improve as far as the gusty conditions out there. But then we have our blowing snow problem up here, again, from a half-mile visibility Thursday, 11 a.m. until midnight. This is going to be courtesy of this trough of lower pressure moving, just clipping through the state, through the northeast corner of the state. And now towards the Aleutian chain, snow showers will continue as this cold air just makes its way out over the open waters and off into the western Aleutians. Expect some snow showers, mainly snow possibly mixing with rain at times. Then on into Friday, that light snow starts to move away from the Beaufort Sea coastline there, so we should start to see just fog settling in really at this point, not really looking for any significant weather. The winds lighten up, so fog, especially for the valley locations because of the high pressure aloft. Then out over the Gulf, there again, we see the boundaries getting ever so closer. Basically, we have our one area of low pressure associated with another area of low pressure further to the south and west out over the North Pacific. And so more moisture coming up loses some of its push. The low pressure system is weakening as it makes its way up, but you can see there right in between that's where we expect the best lift to occur, and that's why we are looking for the winter storm watch to be in effect starting on midnight on Friday, and that's mainly for the southern portions of southeast Alaska. Expect that to be all snow through those areas there south of Sitka, and that really stretches out once again into the Gulf of Alaska, back into Kodiak Island, where we expect the wet conditions to continue. But none of this really makes it into the mainland portion of the state, where high pressure will remain in control. So how about for our temperatures? Well, low temperatures, not going to be all that much of a surprise. Expecting temperatures down near about 35 degrees below zero for the Yukon area, and all the way out across the Brooks Range, anywhere between -10 to -20 degrees. Up along the Beaufort Sea coast, temperatures generally in the minus teens. Southeast Alaska, you'll expect temperatures ranging from 7 all the way up to 26 degrees, 27 degrees in spots. South Central Alaska, generally going to be in the single digits, and Southwest hovering right around zero. How about for Thursday afternoon? Well, you can see we'll rebound here in Southeast Alaska into the mid-20s, possibly even mid-30s. Some single digits there for the higher elevations near Skagway. Up towards the central portion of the state, temperatures generally going to be around -20 for our high on Thursday, and then temperatures in the upper teens to low 20s, finally mid-30s as you stretch out towards the Alaska Peninsula. On into Friday morning now, Expect temperatures to slowly warm a little bit from south to north. Starting to see things with an increased cloud cover, a little bit warmer there over southeast Alaska, but still very cold, -30 over the interior portions of the state, and generally hovering in the single digits or below 0 for south central. And then Friday afternoon, expect temperatures to start to improve a little bit, a slow improvement with some more cloud cover and increasing warm air starting to slide into southeast Alaska. Not a lot of change though.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
All right, let's dive into your flying weather now for Thursday morning. You can see here where our MVFR conditions are aligned from east to west across the Gulf. That's where that warm air is trying to push up against the cold air that's been moving offshore. So this is going to be our real focal point for the flying conditions. So southeast Alaska seeing MVFR conditions, and that stretches out all the way across the northern Gulf until you get to Kodiak Island, where northeast flow favors instrument flight rules for those areas, helping to have a little bit more lift along the mountains with that northeasterly flow. So it usually produces lower ceilings, sometimes lower visibility, but certainly lower ceilings. And that's the same story for Sandpoint, Cold Bay area along the Alaska Peninsula, stretching out into the Aleutians. All the way out into the Aleutians, MVFR conditions expected. Up along the Brooks Range and the Beaufort Sea coast, MVFR starting to slide south with a little bit of IFR, but by the time we get to the afternoon, that area has dropped south courtesy of a weak trough of lower pressure, and so we do expect fairly widespread IFR conditions along the Arctic coastline if you're flying up in those areas Thursday afternoon. Otherwise, along the Gulf Coast, still seeing mostly MVFR conditions from southeast Alaska. The boundary slips a little bit further south tomorrow afternoon, so that area slides south, and we see VFR conditions from much of the northern portion of southeast, but then still IFR conditions by the time you get over to Kodiak Island. Some IFR conditions along the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, but for the most part, MVFR conditions along the Aleutian chain. One small pocket of marginal visual flight rules for the Copper River Basin just on the north side of the Alaska Range. By Friday morning, that area along the Brooks Range and the Beaufort Sea coast has improved, now just MVFR. Along southeast Alaska, you can see more moisture and warm air starting to impact this area here, riding up over our colder air, and so thus IFR conditions for much of southeast Alaska with MVFR for the northern portions. Still seeing that IFR condition over towards Kodiak Island, and then IFR conditions in pockets along the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, and also well out over the western Aleutians. Improving conditions along the north slope with just MVFR offshore. As we look towards southeast Alaska, not seeing a lot of change. This is a slow-moving boundary, but it is going to work its way north, so IFR conditions will remain in play. And then once we get towards Kodiak Island and stretching out along the Aleutian chain there, a little bit more widespread IFR conditions with more moisture starting to work its way north, and MVFR conditions dominating out to the west. So for our passes, well, they're going to be pretty good, except for the northern passes where we see that weak area of low pressure helping to create some IFR conditions for Adigan and Anatuvik Pass later on in the day on Thursday. Otherwise, VFR conditions will be the rule across the rest of the passes. Rainy, windy, Isabel, Mantasta visual flight rules, Tanita also visual flight rules, Portage visual flight rules, and Chilkoot and White Passes visual flight rules. So let's look at our freezing level now, and you can see here the area that we're going to be focusing on for basically all of our weather is going to be down towards southeast Alaska, where that warm air is going to try to work its way slowly to the north, but is backing up against this colder boundary here. Plenty of cold air over the state, so keeping our surface freezing line off of the mainland and really off of much of southeast Alaska as well, but rising all the way up to about 8,000 feet there over the North Pacific. Otherwise, the only other warm area is well to the west of our ridge of high pressure. So in the icing chart, that looks like this. Above 2,000 feet, fairly widespread from southeast Alaska through Kodiak Island and then dropping down into the North Pacific. Above 2,000 feet, that is, and then above 6,000 feet for our weak area of lower pressure up along the northeastern portion of the mainland. How about our jet stream? Well, it's pretty meridional out here, out over top of this ridge. We don't usually see it turn quite this sharply. But when you have a ridge of high pressure in place for this long, sometimes it can make the jet do a little bit unusual things. So coming up at about 125 knots, coming back down at about 105, and then weakening as it comes through the mainland at about 50 knots. Otherwise, for southeast Alaska, seeing a west to easterly flow at about 150 knots, and that's going to keep that boundary just kind of laying right through that area there. And down well south of the Gulf is about 135 knots in support of that low. How does that look in our 9,000-foot winds? Well, we see the north to southwest direction kind of dominating across the state with that offshore flow. About 45 knots there for you along the west coast. Shelikoff, you're the winner with 50 knots coming down from northeast to southwest, that favorable direction. And then we see this turn here for southeast Alaska at 9,000 and also at 3,000, about 45 knots there, coming around this area of low pressure and around that weak warm front. 40 knots of offshore flow there, and similar story across much of southwest Alaska. So how does that look in our turbulence map? Well, still seeing considerable moderate turbulence below 4,000 feet here along the Kuskokwim Mountains and along the south central areas below 6,000 feet. And that stretches all the way out through the Aleutian chain as that cold air works against the terrain from northeast to southwest. So be advised.
Just as the sun is part of weather on Earth, it also affects weather in space. The sun creates solar wind by steadily releasing a flow of plasma particles in all directions around it. Sometimes the sun gives off a flash of light and X-rays. This is known as a solar flare. When massive bursts of particles explode into space, we call it a coronal mass ejection, or CME. When a CME is directed toward Earth, it hits the magnetosphere, the magnetic field around our planet that protects us. If the storm is large, we may even get to enjoy a light display in the sky called the auroras. In space, satellites may be damaged, and astronauts should take cover. On Earth, people do not feel any physical effects. We may lose electricity in some areas, polar flights may be rerouted, and satellite services may be disrupted. While these situations aren't ideal, they are rare and fixable. This is why we will continue to study the Sun and its interactions with Earth and the solar system.
Longing for more space, open skies, and exotic travel? Then look up, about 30 to 600 miles straight up, at the ionosphere, Earth's interface to space. Nestled far above the clouds but below outer space, this little understood destination invites you to explore its many features. Experience both the weather from Earth and the weather from space. Marvel at the ballet of radio waves and navigation signals, like GPS, leaping through this particle paradise. Sit back, relax, and take in the aurora, some satellites, and the International Space Station as they sail by. And you'll want your camera handy for one of the region's signature features, bright and colorful air glow. This daily show is made possible by the ionosphere's own swarming charged particles, because that's what the ionosphere is. It's all charged particles. During the day, enjoy the sea of particles, freshly energized by the sun. As the sun sets, this particle party relaxes and the air glow thins. Our quieter nightlife lets you gaze into clearer skies. The ionosphere is in constant motion, an amazing effect of space weather. Don't miss when solar storms rain down. The storm separates the particles even more, making this colorful region delightfully more dense in some places and stunningly sparse in others. And don't forget about storms from Earth below. Your weather from back home also stirs up this one-of-a-kind destination. Experience the unique beauty of every season, as changes in Earth's atmosphere, daily and annually, can create pressure waves, changing the ionosphere's shape and density. Venture to the equator, where our particles are packed in lush and thick. Cruise along a magnetic field line and see how the ionosphere's charged material also interacts with Earth's own magnetic field. Don't miss the superhighway of particles zipping out to space and back down to the planet. This unpredictable parade of charged particles can help you unplug and unwind. This is because the crowd of particles can garble the radio and satellite communications from home. The ionosphere welcomes you to discover more about this little-known region. After all, once you've explored this interface to space, who knows how much farther you'll be able to go.
When a star, bigger and more massive than the Sun, runs out of fuel at the end of its life, its core collapses while the outer layers are blown off in a supernova explosion. What's left behind depends on the star's original mass. A star roughly 10 to 20 times our Sun leaves behind a neutron star. A more massive star becomes a black hole. Unlike black holes, neutron stars are directly observable, usually as pulsars, the lighthouses of the cosmos. Discovered 50 years ago, they are the densest observable objects in the universe. Neutron stars compress up to twice the Sun's mass into a city-sized sphere. Matter is packed so tightly that a teaspoon of neutron star interior would weigh more than 1 billion tons on Earth. Still, the nature of the ultra-dense matter in the cores of neutron stars is unknown. Because neutron stars pack so much mass into such a tiny volume, they produce gravity strong enough to bend the light they emit, distorting their appearance in a way that enables the mass and size of the star to be measured. Scientists cannot reproduce the extreme conditions in and around neutron stars on Earth. They must look into the galaxy to answer decades-old questions about extreme matter and gravity. NASA's Neutron Star Interior Composition Explorer mission, or NISA, will make X-ray observations of neutron stars from its perch on the International Space Station. It will give astronomers more insight into these mysterious objects, helping determine what is under their surface. A multi-purpose mission, NISA includes a technology demonstration called Sextant. It will analyze NISA's observations to validate the use of rapidly rotating neutron stars as navigation beacons for travel in deep space throughout the solar system and beyond.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
All right, let's take a look at your marine forecast, starting with our sea ice analysis from this afternoon. Our illustrious sea ice forecaster, Mary Beth Schreck, analyzed that basically if you picture that area of high pressure at the surface here, just south of St. Lawrence Island, on the western side, the clockwise flow around it has been working to actually degrade the ice a little bit through here, south of the Kamchatka Peninsula, and so less than 80% coverage concentration through this area. But then as that cold air wraps around that high, again, clockwise rotation around it, helps to push that cold air here, and that's where we've seen more growth down off of southwest Alaska and down towards Bristol Bay. Expect with that cold air to continue to see more growth along the ice pack, and especially also into the Cook Inlet region as well. But be advised that marginal ice out near St. Lawrence Island for those traveling there. Southeast Alaska, your marine forecast for Thursday. You can see here strong winds through Lynn Canal, northerly winds 50 knots and 10-foot seas. Down towards Stevens Passage, we have north winds 35 knots, gusts to 50 on Thursday and 7-foot seas. And then towards Clarence Strait, northeast winds 15 and 4-foot seas. Out over the open waters, generally between 25 and 35 knots there, just off Gustavus, and that's going to be out of the east, and seas between 8 and 10 feet. So how about for Friday? Well, we're going to see those strong northerly winds continue with 50 knots storm force winds in Lynn Canal all the way with gusts to 70. This is flipped around. This should actually be 55 knots with gusts to 70 there for Stevens Passage. So a strong blow on Friday. Don't travel in the marine areas unless you absolutely need to. And then on Clarence Strait on Friday, south northerly winds 25 knots and seas 5 feet. Out towards the open waters, 25 knots generally out of the east or northeast with some gust out of the open bays, and that'll be up to 50 knots, seas generally between 9 and 10 feet. South Central, you're going to see northeast winds throughout the whole area, and very similar to yesterday, a little bit lower in protected areas, and then as that wind has a chance to work across the area and out over the open waters, that's where we expect the seas to continue to build as those winds work. So 3 feet in Prince William Sound, all the way up to 12 feet there in the Barren Islands, and ice covered up here in Cook Inlet, and then, or at least ice filled enough that there's not much wave action. And then for Friday, you can see generally that northeast to east wind will continue. Seas generally between about 2 feet in Prince William Sound, 6 feet over the protected portions of Cook Inlet, but then all the way up to 8 to 11 feet towards the Barren Islands with 20 to 25 knots through those areas. Southwest Alaska and Bristol Bay area, mainly east to northeast winds there as well, offshore flow, 30 to 40 knots. South of the peninsula, generally about 10 to 13 foot seas, and north of it, 6 to 10 foot seas. And for Friday, we'll see seas start to creep up a little bit as that easterly flow continues. 14 to 16 foot seas south of the peninsula with about 30 knots out of the east and northeast. Still 30 knots on the north side, but seas a little bit lower, 6 to 12 feet. For the Aleutian chain, northeast and easterly winds at about 30 knots across the whole area. Seas pretty homogeneous between 12 and 15 feet. And then on into Friday, still seeing that northeasterly flow continuing as we saw on those surface maps, and seas generally about 14 to 16 feet. For the west coast, on Thursday, you can expect north winds up here south of the Seward Peninsula, then switching to northeast, 20 to 30 knots, and seas climbing away from the ice pack, 6 up to 11 feet near the Pribilofs. And on into Friday, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots and seas generally between 8 and 12 feet. How about for the Arctic coastline? Well, northerly winds along the west coast with a little bit more of a westerly flow along the Beaufort Sea coast. 10 to 20 knots here and then becoming 15 to 25 knots along the Beaufort Sea. And then on into Friday, a little bit more confused flow out of the east and northeast, 10 to 25 knots. All ice covered up there, and westerly along the Beaufort Sea, 15 knots. So let's recap the weather. As you can see here out over the Gulf is where all of our moisture across much of the state tonight will exist, and that's just going to continue to keep a rain-snow mix in there for Kodiak. Possibility of some light snow clipping along the Arctic coastline there. Otherwise, dry offshore flow continues. And as we get into Thursday, things get a little bit more active up here near Barter Island, so a winter weather advisory for blowing snow. Visibility is down as low as a half mile, and that's in effect from 11 a.m. Thursday until midnight. And then down towards southeast Alaska, that's where we can start to see that battleground set up with more of the moisture working its way northward and helping to work against that cold air from the north. And so with that plenty of moisture to work with, we'll start to see the rain from the south turn into snow as it gets a little bit closer towards Port Alexander and Cake. And so by Friday, 12 a.m. Friday, we do have a winter storm watch in effect from 12 a.m. Friday until Friday evening. Generally 5 to 10 inches throughout the area, mainly south of Sitka, but possibility of 12 to 18 inches near Hyder. Well, thanks for joining us this evening. Hope you have a great Wednesday night, and we'll see you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.